Well, ladies and gentlemen, it would seem as if one of our Supreme Court justices, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, has not only started publicly trash talking President Trump, but now she's also actively advocating for judicial tyranny. Now, Ketanji Brown Jackson has a very long and storied history of radically progressive, belligerent behavior. She's been pushing the woke agenda from the moment she stepped onto the bench, but what she just said the other day should honestly be grounds for her removal from the Supreme Court entirely. So, what happened? Well, yesterday afternoon, while giving a speech in Puerto Rico, Justice Jackson decided that it was time to abandon the last shred of Supreme Court decorum that she had and go full resistance activist. She stood up and publicly argued from a sitting justice's perch that President Trump is a danger to our democracy. In fact, here's what she said word for word. Take a look. Across the nation, judges are facing increased threats of not only physical violence, but also professional retaliation just for doing our jobs. And the attacks are not random. They seem designed to intimidate those of us who serve in this critical capacity. The threats and harassment are attacks on our democracy, on our system of government, and they ultimately risk undermining our Constitution and the rule of law. To all of the judges across the country that are standing up to President Trump, I applaud your raw courage, and I urge you to keep going. Keep doing what is right for our country, and I do believe that history will vindicate your service. So, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Not only is she publicly calling President Trump a danger to our democracy, but she's also actively endorsing the ongoing judicial tyranny. A sitting Supreme Court justice just publicly applauded federal judges for subverting the executive authority of the President of the United States, encouraged them to keep going, and basically told them that she'll be cheering from the sidelines while they continue sabotaging President Trump's agenda. Now, I don't care what side of the political spectrum you're on personally, that is completely inappropriate. That is a blatant violation of the very judicial neutrality that our entire system is supposed to rely on. When a sitting Supreme Court justice goes out and starts openly encouraging unelected federal judges to overrule the democratic will of the American people, especially when that will is expressed through a democratically elected president, you no longer have a functioning republic, you have a judicial tyranny, no questions about it. And so here's the truth. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's comments weren't just wildly inappropriate, but they were also dangerous. They represent a radical far-left ideology that is fundamentally incompatible with the job that she holds on the Supreme Court. Her role is to interpret the law neutrally, not to lead a progressive crusade against the America First movement. She's not just defending individual rogue rulings. No, it's even worse. She's defending the entire rogue judiciary, one that routinely oversteps its constitutional limits to legislate from the bench and block President Trump's voter-mandated executive actions. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, along with all of her fellow radical progressives, have realized that they've lost almost all of their political power in the country. They lost the House, they lost the Senate, they lost the popular vote, they lost well over half of the state legislatures, and they lost the White House. So they've realized that the one and only way that they can try to sabotage the America First movement is by weaponizing the judiciary, which is exactly what they're doing. And so keep this in mind, when this unelected, radically progressive judiciary moves to block President Trump at every single turn, and when people like Justice Jackson cheer them on, that's not democracy in action. Once again, that is judicial tyranny. But you know what? This isn't even the first time that she's acted like this. Did you know that in 2023, Justice Jackson spoke nearly twice as much as any other justice on the Supreme Court? She just never stops talking, a never-ending stream of incoherent, radically progressive nonsense. In fact, recently her incoherent progressive babbling got so bad that even Justice Sotomayor, yes, Sotomayor, one of the most progressive justices in the country, literally had to tell her to shut up so that someone else could speak. Let that sink in for a second. If Justice Sotomayor is telling you to stop talking, that's how you know that you're an incompetent loudmouth idiot. But beyond that embarrassment factor, this situation is deadly serious because Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson isn't just annoying, she's dangerous. Her unconstitutional rhetoric, her far-left activism, and her encouragement of judicial lawlessness are actively tearing apart not just the legitimacy of the Supreme Court, but it's tearing apart the country itself. Folks, here's the truth. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson is a living, breathing, walking constitutional crisis. She is one of the only 9 people in the entire country entrusted with final say over the meaning, the interpretation of the U.S. Constitution. And instead of advising caution and respect for the rule of law, she's actually encouraging federal judges to weaponize their judicial positions against the sitting president of the United States. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a one-way road to judicial tyranny. That is, if we're not there already. But okay, is there a constitutional remedy for this kind of disgrace? Well, here's some light at the end of the tunnel. You see, Article 3, Section 1 of the U.S. Constitution says, "The judges, both of the Supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior." Keyword being good behavior, because if you ask me, encouraging unelected federal judges to sabotage and undermine the democratically elected president of the United States probably doesn't fall under that umbrella. So yes, the Trump administration could potentially make the case that Justice Jackson's conduct violates the good behavior clause, but even then, and here's the catch, it would take 67 votes in the Senate to actually get rid of her. And so let's be honest, with just how corrupt and cowardly our current Senate is, that's probably not going to happen. But that doesn't mean that we need to stay quiet. We need to call this behavior what it really is, an anti-American, anti-constitutional disgrace. Here's the truth. Our founding fathers would be rolling in their graves if they knew that an incompetent, loudmouth, radical progressive like Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson was not only sitting on the highest court in the land, but also actively encouraging judicial sabotage of the democratically elected president of the United States. Frankly, the fact that the Founding Fathers didn't include an easier mechanism for removing people like her probably just shows how unimaginable her level of stupidity was to guys like them. Back in their day, Supreme Court justices actually made an effort to try to remain judicially impartial, as opposed to actively trying to undermine and subvert our republic. And so, folks, the struggle to make this country great again continues to this very day, but here's a final message to all of these radical progressives, just like Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. America first is inevitable. Now, folks, before we wrap up with today's video, I want to say real quick that I've actually gone ahead and made a community Facebook page where I'll be posting additional news and updates as it relates to all of this. So if you guys use Facebook, check out the pinned comment down below and give that page a follow. But everyone, that is going to be a wrap for today's video, so please go down below and drop a comment. Let me know what you think about all of this. Please like the video while you're down there. As I said earlier, please consider subscribing to the channel because it really does help a ton with my daily struggle here on YouTube. Thank you all very much for tuning in today, and of course, as always, stay safe.